Well, welcome, welcome, fellow explorers of the inner realms. Glad to have you back. I, of course, am Jonathan Robinson. I'm with my trusty co-host, sidekick, and man about town,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
There you are, Brian. We're very thrilled to have two people here who are guest explorers that Brian will introduce in a moment. I'll just give you a tidbit of why we introduced them. They've created some movies that if you wanted to know everything about the Earth that was weird, wonderful, and amazing about awakening, I think their movies cover it all. And you may have seen them, you probably heard of them. But before we talk to them, Brian, why don't you tell them or tell our guests, tell our listeners about our guests?
Sure, thanks, Jonathan. Daniel J. Schmidt founded the not-for-profit Awaken the World initiative in 2012, and Tanya Mahar joined the team in 2016. Together they create films, run the Samadhi Meditation Center in Canada, and engage in other projects that support the ATW initiative. They believe that through the sharing of our own inner journeys, it is possible to inspire and support others on their path. Their films include Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, and Samadhi. And I just have to add my own note that these films are absolutely gorgeous. Inner Worlds and Outer Worlds is in 4 parts, and Samadhi in 2 parts. And they're absolutely visual treats and oral audio treats and food for thought and food for the soul treats in that way. So I'm so happy you came on, Tanya and Daniel, to talk with us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
So, you know, I've been fortunate to meet a lot of spiritual teachers and also people in the media. And I'm always impressed when people can take their worldview, their dream, and bring it to a wider audience. And you both have done that so well. I'm wondering a little bit about your journey. What inspired you to really have the background to make these movies? And what has been the experience of putting these wonderful pieces of work out there to a large audience?
Well, I would say, you know, my background, I've had a sort of eclectic background in terms of my employment history and my, you know, working history. So I was doing television shows for the Discovery Channel at one point. You know, a lot of what I created back then, you know, was sort of cookie cutter, you know, stuff for TV, but I learned a lot of the skills to put it all together and you know, production skills. And I've been creating music since I was a little kid. And the show that I did for Discovery Channel was about animation. So I learned, we were interviewing a lot of different animators and, you know, going to Industrial Light and Magic and places like that. So I got to see the tools and the types of things for special effects that were out there. So, you know, and I'm just curious. I'm not an expert in any of that stuff, but I know enough that I can kind of hack my way through things. And so I've accumulated a lot of just little pieces along the way, and I'll let you.
Yeah, so I have a very different way of showing up to work on these projects with Dan. So when Dan and I first connected, we did a lot of meditation together every day. Pretty much we'd meet and do long sits as the Samadhi Center was being built, and afterwards, and we would have long discussions afterwards. And this is when Dan was really, I think, still in the writing phase of Samadhi Part 1, when I kind of came on the scene. And so we would discuss, you know, ideas in the film and you know, a big part of, I think, my role in the process was to get Dan to kind of communicate things in a very clear way, in a very kind of, you know, if someone didn't know much about meditation or about a lot of the, you know, traditions around meditation, could they understand what you're talking about? And so we, you know, kind of, Dan really encouraged me early on to come help with the films. And, you know, I have 15 years working as a court reporter in mostly criminal courtrooms. So I had like zero experience in this field. And but I loved just, the exchange back and forth of ideas. And, we would kind of bounce, just like approaches back and forth about how to convey what's happening on the cushion to folks through the films, through the narration and the images. And so it was a very slow process for me. Dan was very patient. He kind of kept just kind of very gently, pulling me more and more into the projects. And I just found that it just kind of happened. It was never a plan of mine. And I just really felt an aliveness in me around the films. And if we were working on a part of the film, it was quite surprising for me that I would just feel like, oh, this isn't quite right. And we need to kind of go back and revisit. And so it was quite a strange, wonderful, frightening kind of experience for me to kind of feel like, A, I was qualified, and B, and Dan had worked on his own for many years. So it
was an interesting thing that started to happen, because after doing Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, I felt this strong impulse to do the Samadhi film, and I was working away, all this stuff was coming, but it was like, it didn't have that sort of, like when Tanya mentioned the inner aliveness, it didn't have that connectedness to that sort of energy to connect with people. And so I was just kind of stuck in a loop. I was just kind of creating over and over, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was making that connection. And it's because it was waiting for Tanya to come and to make that connection. And the neat thing about Samadhi, like making the Samadhi film, it's been a huge sort of letting go experience, because I'm used to being a bit of a one-man show, kind of, a bit of a control freak, actually. And Samadhi, of course, is about union. It's about letting go of yourself, about letting go of that attachment. So literally, in order to deliver, to be an effective delivery mechanism for the film, I've had to really go through, we both have sort of had to meet in this way where, there's been a lot of friction, a lot of challenges as we go through our path, kind of stripping away a lot of the nonsense that it was preventing us from, letting it come through in a more pure way, I guess you could say.
It's interesting, as you describe that, it sounds a little bit like what Brian and I have gone through in creating a podcast. We're both very opinionated and very enlightened, right, Brian?
Yeah. That's been the biggest problem.
Who are you talking about?
No, so I think it's really a spiritual process when two people can come together and create something better than the individuals could do, for the sake of a higher purpose. And in that process, there's a letting go of some of one's rough edges. And so while you're creating something that is a benefit to other people, in that process, you're going through a spiritual letting go process. And I get a sense of that from what you are speaking about. And thank you for doing that. I know it's not always easy. Brian and I have been pretty smooth in our ability to do this, which I'm grateful for, but we're not a couple, so it makes it a little easier.
That's right.
And we're doing the Samadhi Center as well. So, we're both sort of going through this process. At the beginning, we just felt the impulse to do it, but our teaching skills were not that great. So we've gone through a huge evolution there, and it's been like being in school, watching people go through, doing these 10-day retreats and just seeing what's happening, watching the different facets of the journey for different people. And so we've been, being educated in many different ways through this process as well. So yeah, and there's been a lot of friction, and you know, it hasn't been an easy ride for sure. It's,
Uh-huh.
you
But
know,
a real accelerator too, in terms of, heart opening to
yeah, well,
really.
that's it, and you know, I think those two things go together. Like we can be like mirrors. Like Tanya shows me all the things I don't want to see about myself. You know, the hard truth a lot of the time, and I try and do the same for her. And that is what allows love to be there, because love is you know, not separate from that truth. You know, because a lot of what passes for love is I think kind of clinging and attachment, and you know,
Right.
some idea of how things should be. But you know, that truth of what we are, you know, that we're not these limited characters that we're playing out, you know, that to stay connected to that truth requires, I think, a lot of willingness to see things that are not always pleasant.
That was just the word I was going to say. It sounds like willingness to allow this, to allow yourselves to go through this, and to stay open to things as they change and things as they might not go as you want seems to be so key. So it's great to hear you say that.
Mm-hmm. And we have a teacher, Nico, as well, who has been instrumental in our journey as well. He wields the sword of truth, and he's shown us you know, some of our biggest patterns. So it's been so helpful. It's the one thing out of anything on my path, I think, having someone just willing to, you know, well, first of all, I'm able to see the patterns. Not everybody can see those patterns, but then willing to actually tell you, you know, and that to me is love. Even though in the moment it doesn't feel like love, it feels like you're being dismantled. But
Yeah, no, I have someone like that in my life as well for my wife and I. And, we haven't really talked much about what could be called relationship yoga. But when people come together and they're both trying to seek truth, of course, a lot of the shadow sides show up. And in your case, you're working together, so that brings even more of that
yeah.
to the surface. And I think part of the wisdom in your films really comes from your deep experience of being through this process yourself, that there's a depth conveyed in it that might not be conveyed if it was just like uh, an intellectual thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah.
And one of the
Brian, you
things that
took like 9 pages of notes on their films. I'm wondering what you.
it's true, I did. Well, a lot of it was because you so generously also provide PDFs of the text of the film. So I said a lot of it's just copying and pasting my favorite quotes. But one thing that struck me was, because it starts with a lot of talk about symbols and cultures in ancient times and up to the present, across all cultures. It reminded me so much of the Joseph Campbell interviews with Bill Moyers, The Power of Myth, I think it was called. And so that was really fascinating and gratifying. But to me, it went even a step further, because then it goes into steps we can take, what we can do, as opposed to just sort of a scholarly analysis. So it sort of starts with a scholarly analysis, but then they all go into what can we do. And so I'd love to hear about whether that was indeed an influence, and also because one of your films is called Samadhi, and I don't know whether our audience all know exactly what that means. If you might go into a little detail about that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So yeah, first of all, we love Joseph Campbell. You know, he's been definitely a huge influence, and also Carl Jung. You know, the world of archetypes, symbols, all of that has been something that's been, you know, hugely just a draw for me. And another one is Henry Corbin. I don't know if you guys know him. He was a huge influence on Carl Jung. He was sort of a master of Islamic studies, and really into the Persian teachers, But he talked a lot about the imaginal realm, which he distinguishes from imaginary. You know, the imaginal is really the the subtle realm, the intermediary realm, which is composed of archetypes and many different worlds as well. So so I've been really interested in that. A lot of it has come out of just weird experiences that I've had, that I've tried to find other people who've had similar experiences. Do you want to talk a bit about that as well?
No, I think it's good. No, I think you.
Yeah, and for samadhi, to me, like, samadhi is it's an interesting thing. Like, I think it means literally union. Union with all the different parts of ourselves. Realizing our true nature. So realizing that we're not this limited being, but there are these other hidden levels of self that exist. In the Upanishads, they talk about how there's the mental and physical, which is what most of humanity is living on, but we have the subtle realm, the higher mind realm, or the dharma realms, and then we have the causal realm, and the samadhi is realizing this awakening, or realization of this true nature that that sort of penetrates or permeates all of these realms, because all of these realms are Maya essentially, but there's an awakened sort of beingness, or sometimes I call it primordial consciousness, that if when that primordial consciousness awakens and doesn't come and go, which for us it's still coming and going. We get good runs of it sometimes, but that's the big sort of enlightenment, which in some traditions, or in Vedanta, it's Turiya, that presence that doesn't come and go, that divine presence. So in a lot of, there are many different definitions of samadhi, many different traditions use it in different ways. In Buddhism, they equate it or correlate it kind of with concentration, which is a big part of it, because part of it is being fully present, sort of concentrated in the now. But the way we use it in the films is more connected to the the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the ancient teachings, that they talk about it more as penetrating the three realms, or penetrating all of the layers of Maya, essentially, to realize that ever-present primordial consciousness, I guess you would say.
So is Maya the illusion of self? I think that's how you described it, in the illusion of the separate self?
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes I think that's an important distinction. It's the separate or limited self, which is the illusion. So, some teachers, like, obviously Ramana Maharshi or Vedanta, they talk about self with the big S, so that's something different, to realize the true self, or the immanent self, is that primordial consciousness that I'm talking about. So so the illusion is that we're this limited form. So Maya is really being identified with this limited me, this Dan character that's here, or Tanya character.
Mm-hmm. So what's the go ahead, Jonathan.
You use the term, of course, for the two of you, it comes and goes. I'm wondering what you do to help it, quote, come, and what tends to make it go in your personal practice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, you use the word technique junkie, I think, Jonathan, I think before we started recording, and I resonate with that. So I started meditating 20 something years ago, and it was someone would just, I think my brother handed me a cassette tape stack of John Kabat-Zinn's, and I just did that. And then it was like Jack Cornfield, and then it was, Adyashanti, and then it was Osho. And I would just kind of just cycle through and sometimes return back. And so, I don't know if, for me, I know everybody's path is different. Speaking to people who come to the center, some folks have just found, the tradition that works for them and just hung, stayed with the course there the entire time. And I've been more kind of slowly moving down the buffet table, and I'll kind of linger at a dish I like and then move along. And so there are certainly some teachings and teachers that have come along that have had a profound impact on my own, ability to have these insights. And but to be honest, I continue to kind of cycle through. I still haven't landed. I haven't really stuck. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So I'm not suggesting it's the way to go for anyone. But for me, and having said that, I think it's helped to serve us with the films, because just having a kind of broad, taste of different traditions and techniques has helped, especially when it comes to, when folks come to the meditation center and they perhaps have practiced particular techniques. We have maybe, at least a base understanding maybe of what they've been working with and how they've been working with it. And so I don't know if that answers your question. It's not really an answer. I will say that have someone who I was driven into meditation, as many people I think are, through my own suffering. So, I've had a lifelong experience with anxiety, physical pain, chronic pain. I had an addiction, to alcohol for many years. And so, that just by grace, I was driven towards meditation as a way to help me, skillfully manage the reality of my life. And time again, that's where I would find my relief. And then it kind of evolved to things would happen on the cushion. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, where did I go? Or, that was weird. What do they call this? So that always fueled, my hours in the cushion, was just finding ways to feel my heart, really, too.
Yeah.
When I had my son's 14, the first few years of his life, I have this beautiful baby. I'm like, I don't know if I feel my heart. I had so much armoring. It was so obscured by so many layers. And so meditation, that's been a big part of my focus, just to soften and to really truly feel that love Dan talked about, where it's not conditional on getting something back or someone being something or me being something, just connecting to that love that we are. So we talk about techniques. It kind of depends. I love Shinzen Young's work. I've gone kind of deep into the Unified Mindfulness System, and so I integrate a lot of his techniques. And I also love the non-dual technique. So oftentimes I just weave both literally into my daily practice, and that's worked for me. It's
Yeah, I've used the buffet model myself, and so has Brian.
Yeah, that really does strike a chord with me, because things that may work today may not tomorrow for me, or for some people and not others. And I find that I sit down with the intention of a certain one, and then another one will just sort of move in and say, no, this is what you need to be doing now. And
that's exactly, we talk about the techniques as being sort of stepping stones, or like a thorn to remove a thorn. So, because the techniques themselves are conditioned, they're obviously something that you learn, but the samadhi state, to enter into that state, it's a state, it's an unconditioned state ultimately. So these techniques can be useful to, if they're big conditioned patterns, you can break up that operation of the self structure. But ultimately, if you're just practicing a technique over and over, there's that conditioning running, and you'll never come to that still point. So I think, I love Vedanta when they say, it is a thorn to remove a thorn. You have to be willing, it's almost like if you do the technique long enough, it kind of whatever you're doing, if you're observing the breath, it's like this alchemy starts to happen, and it's like you just merge into it, and all of a sudden there's just breath, or you're just breathing. So it's almost like the technique extinguishes itself if you do it long enough, I think.
Yeah, and I find that no matter what technique I'm using, let's say nothing is happening, or let's say I'm still lost in thought, or I'm not really entering into the state of being aware of awareness or samadhi or whatever you want to call it. It's practically always because of one or two reasons. Either one, I'm trying to recreate some experience or state I had in the past, or I'm trying to prevent or get rid of some feeling or experience I'm having now.
Mm-hmm. That's a profound insight. Yeah, that's so important, I think. When I had my first samadhi experience, I spent several years after that trying to recreate that experience. My mind was desperate to figure it out, and the reason I had it was because I was a complete beginner. I went into the retreat with beginner's mind, so I had no idea. I just kind of mindlessly followed it. And then, but then my mind was like, okay, I did it. The mind took credit for it. And it's like, okay, I did it. How did I do it? How, and then I'm trying to recreate the circumstances. But it was because the mind wasn't involved that it happened in the first place. So it's so tricky how we try, we have these openings, and then it gets appropriated by the ego structure over and over. And it's insidious how it works.
Yeah, it's hard to get that the way in is to be totally okay with whatever's happening, that that full allowance even of hell leads to heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. And the equanimity, or whatever you want to call that, being okay with what is. And it's tricky because you can be in a state where you're not equanimous, but you can actually, there are these meta levels of it. So you can be okay with the fact that you're not equanimous. And so that there's always this sort of stepping back into this awareness that, I think there's always a crack, it's like, was that Leonard Cohen said, there's a crack in everything. So
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, there's always a little, a possibility of letting go or stepping back a little bit.
Yeah, we both love that Leonard Cohen line, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in, or something like that.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, my sadhana and my, like the Samadhi part 3 is really about sadhana. It's about the practices, and I think a big distinction, one of the most important distinctions in the film is that Samadhi is a state. It's like the fourth state, this awakened state. But there's also a stage of Samadhi. There's also this developmental stage, and that stage is really, it's working within the self structure. It's it's the wiring, the rewiring, the inner lotus, the chakras. In spiral dynamics, it's all the spirals. However you want to describe this sort of unfolding development through the self structure. And to me, that, that's what allows Samadhi to become a more permanent acquisition, is we're working through this, human process and developing the subtler and subtler wiring so that we become sort of a purified vessel to be more permeable, I guess, to that awareness. So for me, it's the farther I go down that road, yes, like we still do the practices, we're still running a retreat center. So a lot of the times where that turiya becomes present for me is during intensive practice, usually at retreats,
Mm-hmm.
or we're also doing iboga retreats with meditation. we're calling them I am retreats. So it's iboga assisted meditation. And, you know, so those times of intensive practices are definitely when, you know, that sort of awareness becomes present. But there's also just life as well, which, you know, and the way I see it, it's like as you develop on the path, it's like your baseline of sort of non-dual permeability gets a little higher. So, you know, you get, you know, a little bit more awareness as you progress on the path. And so, you know, so we have, you know, like anybody, we lose it, we get identified with stuff. But I think if you look over the last 20 years, you know, I'm suffering less, hopefully creating less suffering for other people as well. And, you know, so that to me is the measure, is just that, you know, the identification gets less over time.
That's beautiful. I have a question that probably only the two of you can answer, and that is, you probably made at least in recent years, the best known movies about practice and awareness, and have reached an audience, which is impressive. Not many people can do that. And I'm wondering what the response is. What do you get back, or how have people reacted to your movies?
Well, yeah, all different ways, but mostly very well. You know, we get very little, like we you know, if in terms of negative response, it's usually, you know, kind of, you know, it's not usually a sophisticated sort of critique or coming from someone, you know, who has had direct experience. It's usually, you know, more just like what you see on the internet, kind of, you know, this is bullshit kind of thing. But overall, I would say, you know, it's been overwhelmingly positive, and so much synergy has come from these films. You know, originally, like, it was a big decision to release them. You know, originally Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, there was a point where I had to really let go and decide to release it for free, basically, you know, or treat it like a regular film and try and monetize it and everything. And by letting it go, it's interesting, like the synergies that have unfolded from that are incredible. We've connected with so many artists and musicians who've contributed to the other films, and you know, just a lot has, you know, we have connected with people recently who are supporting the Awaken the World initiative. We have a sort of benefactor who's recreating our website for us, you know, creating like a world-class website that's going to be out in a couple months. So none of this we could have predicted. So you know, I think it has been a journey. I feel like it's, you know, we're part of something, you know, because people reach out from all different parts of the world, you know, telling us how, you know, they're doing the same thing, or that, you know, the film, like if they could have created the film, you know, that's the film they would have created, and it's like they're already doing the work. They're already doing this same sort of purification and evolution. So, you know, if anything, to me, it makes me feel that we're part of something bigger, you know, that it's already happening, and that, you know, you know, and it's sort of a confirmation that we're, you know, we've created something that has that sort of resonance with
That's
people.
beautiful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know in our better days, Brian and I feel that with this podcast, because people will approach us and say, well, I really like that one. And it's really important, especially in this day and age of so much separation, to feel like you're part of a movement, you're part of a growing family that understands each other. And you know, I used to be part of a spiritual community where it was very easy to feel that. A few years ago, I left it. So now I really look for, well, that's a soul of the same tribe. And that's a really good feeling, to be able to support each other in this endeavor, which is not that popular in a cultural level.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's what really strikes me. You know, we have these online Zoom meditations, and you know, I couldn't tell you how many people have seen the Samadhi films. I don't look at the YouTube. I don't look at the comments. I kind of forget sometimes that people see them. You know how it is. You work on something, and it gets birthed. And then, I mean, we always have overlapping projects, so we always have 2 or 3 other projects that are probably in progress. And so I just kind of hunker down. And so my inclination isn't I get a bit surprised sometimes when people reach out and say, hey, the film really had a profound impact. I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, right. There's the films out there, and people are seeing it. But what really, I love what you said, Jonathan, about that community, because what I'm finding is there's so many people contacting us that are just like, look, there's no one I can talk to about this. There's no one in my community. I don't have a meditation group or a teacher or a friend. You know, we don't consider ourselves teachers so much. It's just friends. You know, we're friends in the path. We share our experience. We learn so much from other people's experience. And so these calls to me, I often by the end of the call, I'm like, oh, my heart is so full, because, you know, it's just such, even on these little squares on the screen, it's really surprised me how rich and real the connection is. Coming together live and practicing together, and you know, we do these 1-hour online meditations. We do a number of 2 a week. We do now a 30-minute and a 1-hour guided meditation, and Dan and I kind of take turns leading it. And oftentimes we do the 1-hour sit, and then our Q&A reporting sharing time is like 3 hours. And I'm like, oh, we gotta like try to trim that down, because that's like, it's, you know, because people just, it's just such a beautiful space, and to have that opportunity to connect and share our experiences on this path has been, to me, one of the most beautiful kind of byproducts of reaching these folks.
And
Yeah, I've heard. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and I think it does inform the stuff that we're working on as well. You know, being actually connected to people, and it's amazing how it's uncanny actually how, you know, the person you'll be talking to will bring something to light that is exactly reflected in what we're working on. So to me, it's a giant feedback mechanism.
Yes, I've heard a lot of people talk about a shift from the master-disciple paradigm to the friend paradigm in spiritual circles, and I've witnessed that myself. It's, you know, it's amazing the collective wisdom that's there among just the people you know and have met through following particular teachers or going to retreats or meetings or meetups.
Yeah, I think you know, the guru is an archetype. So it is, you know, it's a pattern essentially. And you know, if you, to me, you know, I don't feel like I would want to take on, you know, an archetype or a mask of a teacher, because then there's this expectation that you have to be a certain way, and you know, you sort of follow this script. So to me, like, to be truly free is to be free of being any kind of teacher or guru. And you know, like, to me, the purpose or the real sort of guru is just someone who has realized samadhi, and they just keep pointing you into yourself, you know, and they do that out of compassion, but they're not playing some role to do that. They, you know, like the person that we are connected, we refer to him as our teacher, Nico, but he isn't, he's living on a farm. He's a farmer essentially, just living his life, and but he feels this incredible desire to, because of his own realization, he has a huge heart. He just wants to help people to realize who they are. So he'll tirelessly work to that end. But it's not, you know, he hasn't, you know, you'll show up and he's just in his rubber boots, and he's like, you know, the most grounded person you'll ever meet. So, and to me, that has been an amazing example to let go of all this kind of spiritualized, you know, baggage and nonsense, because I created a strong spiritual persona at one point, and when I was living with my ex-wife, we had a yoga meditation center, and you know, I had this idea of being something, you know, being this teacher, and it was holding me back on my path. And you know, of course, Nico, you know, gave me the sword of truth on that one, and Tanya as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that can be pretty heavy. I went through that as well, where I was a teacher to about 40 people. And luckily at the time I had a teacher above me, and he eventually said, I think you're starting to take and run with this, and suggest I stop, which I did. And that was really a springboard to a new level of growth. So really being teachers to each other, we all have a piece of the pie. I really appreciate the piece that you two bring, because not many people have such a broad view that they can put it out into a way that other people get. And your background, I mean, you go into neuroscience, you go into DMT, you go into Iboga, you talk about chakras, you talk about, you know, I felt like every book I've read for the last 30 years is somehow mentioned in your movies, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's like a little kind of remnant of our journey, you know.
Yeah.
It's like a record of all the things we've explored, really, and you know, that's it. Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Definitely not experts in these areas, and you know, the thing that excites me is like this sort of perennial truth, or the perennial teaching. And you know, like on the next film, you know, really what excites me is what I'm seeing with these different traditions, whether it's, you know, Buddhism or Sufism or Vedanta. There's this, you know, they all have radically different practices, but there's a sort of fundamental underlying mechanism to how it works, how the whole sort of awakening and development process works. And we're still trying to find simple language to convey that. But to me, that is what excites me, is finding the connections between all these traditions and getting to the root of what's actually happening energetically. And I think it's, you know, the basis of it is you're interrupting the pattern of you know, all of these practices interrupt your, you know, whatever conditioning is running. They're like interrupters, you know. That's the first part of it. But you know, it's, to me, you know, there's something that is, you know, it's like a mystery to be solved, you know, to find the language to convey how that works. And so
I think it's getting out there. I last week I spent 4 days at a virtual Tony Robbins seminar. Do you know who he is?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. And you know, I've followed his work for maybe 35 years, and I found it fascinating how it's changed recently, where he's now talking more about interrupting your conditioning so you can get to your real identity as presence and awareness and love. And you know, when it's getting to a point where Tony Robbins, he had like 30,000 people at this retreat or this workshop, that it means that it's getting to not lower, but getting to more traditional parts of our culture. And there is a commonality there, that we all want love, we all want peace, we all have our stuff, we have our triggers, and these ancient traditions, as you say, are all pointing us in a direction where we can get to that. And the buffet model works for some people, the guru model works for some people, the yoga model works for some people, and in your movies you haven't excluded any of that, which is not easy to do.
Yeah, I think it's like, that's amazing to hear that Tony Robbins is doing that. That's, to me, it makes sense, you know, that, you know, his you know, I've only seen, you know, his movie and a few things, but there's so much energy there. And to me, when that energy is alive, there is an evolution. And to me, it makes perfect sense that you would be, moving to the next level with all of it. So that's really awesome. I think it's a neat time right now. I think just this whole lockdown and everything is, Nico was saying that, people, they're sitting with their so much fear and so much, just so many of these deep feelings that are normally hidden are right at the surface now. And if we can, really in our sadhana, in our practice, we can just be with those deep feelings of fear or whatever it is, sadness, or letting go of the whole, paradigm that we're attached to, and just kind of burn in it, just let ourselves burn in it. That's an incredible opportunity right now, and if we bring those things out of the unconscious, it's an opportunity. But also, if they just fester, if we don't bring the light to them, then it can take us down at this time right now, because that energy is it can be liberating, or it can be, turn into disease or whatever, turning into, what is the, in the native tradition, there's the Watiko. Have you heard of that? Where it's like the, that inner energy or inner spirit, if it is, it can sort of get captured by negative patterns. So it can become almost like a really demonic force that, and I think we're seeing that, where people are getting overtaken by, going into these protests and they're turning violent in that. And, so it can be, if we can maintain the consciousness of that inner world, it can take us to the light, or it can take us to darkness, however we kind of harness it.
If you're familiar with Shinzen's work, he loves using formulas, the math formulas. And I love that, intensity times equanimity equals purification. And I just love, Dan's mentioned our teacher, Nico, a few times, and I would go work with Nico and I would have a lot of fear. It was my ego. I had literally my body would vibrate with fear, because I knew going to see him, there's no hiding. It's right. You're going for the sword. And he would be like, that's a good thing. That fear that's filling you is an energy. It's a strength. So when you can shift your relationship to it, it's an amazing, accelerator in terms of our ability to access and purify some of that, those blockages, those parts of, myself, sanskaras, whatever you want to call them, that are stuck. It's a great access point. But I think, with the caveat that it's great to have someone you can talk to about it, a friend or a teacher, because I think, we've also been contacted, especially since COVID, quite a bit in the last few months, by people really struggling, very fearful, strange phenomena happening, just really nightmarish experiences. So, I think it's really important that if we're going to turn towards some of these intense challenges, that we have some kind of support system in place, because it can be very disorienting and just straight up scary. It can be a very scary place to walk by yourself. So, great place to go and explore, but maybe have a little rope to the barn when you do it.
Right. Great point.
It's like the hero's journey, is sort of manifesting, I think, on many different levels. Each individual is going through it, but I think, now it's like we are descending into the nadir, sort of, collectively right now. So there's, and it's, to me, it's fascinating what's happening on a collective level. If you think about what the collective unconscious has been sort of recycling for the last many years, if you look on Netflix and or these different things, it's like showing us what's in the collective unconscious. And I think, all of that is starting to come out of the, in personally and collectively now. So it's neat. I think this is a kind of unique time where we are actually seeing a shift of humanity itself to a different level. It's like we're moving into sort of a post-truth, post-duality, post-historical, post-everything. So it's that to me is exciting, but it's also it's scary if you're holding on to the old stuff. It's definitely not an easy ride.
Yeah. But I know you guys are going to lead us in a guided meditation, but Brian, I'm wondering if you have any last questions that you'd like to ask.
Well, sure. Because we're awareness explorers, and our specialty is awareness practices, turning attention from the content of awareness to awareness itself. And for me, awareness is, because it has no qualities and it's pure, it's the same in me as it's looking. In other words, what's looking out through my eyes is identical to what's looking out through your eyes, and may even be the one universal awareness, the universe aware of itself. And focusing attention back to that creates a little shift of identity. So that was just a little summary of at least my thoughts about awareness. So I was curious if you might want to talk about how that jives with your views on samadhi and inner worlds, outer worlds.
Yeah. I think my experience is in Buddhism they talk about the jhanas, the sort of stages of meditative absorption, and like I've had many different awakenings, and so I think that it's interesting. There's a phrase in Zen: always being Buddha, always becoming Buddha. So there's this like that awareness is eternal, it's perfect, it needs no development process. It just is, it's everything, it's all of this. And that's the cosmic joke when we awaken is, we look at these practices and we go, what the hell, this little character was doing all this stuff to try and awaken, but it's all that, it's all that awareness. So it's, so there is this sort of cosmic joke, but at the same time, there's this gravity of the spiral, of Maya, and that awareness gets obscured from itself. So the jhanas, or these stages of absorption, it's like we move through these developmental processes, or we move, or even in a sit in our meditation, we can drop these levels of mind, and each level of mind that drops away, it's like a little awakening, and it's like we become more present, and there's more energy simultaneously. So there, it's this kind of paradox where there's this stripping away, this actual penetrating of Maya through these practices, but then you awaken to exactly where you started, where you are, where you've always have been, and that awareness. It's just we think we have to do something to get to that, and it's that's the paradox. And the Zen teacher that I had, he would always say, you can just drop the struggle, just recognize who is struggling, but then that struggler hears that, and then you're struggling to drop the struggle, because you so it's like this friction has to happen, and that's the alchemy of meditation. It's like we're stirring the pot, and this alchemy is sort of happening, and then at some point, you can't control that awakening. Awareness, it's like, oh yeah, of course, like how could I forget? But we do it over and over. So do you want to add to that, Tony?
No, I think that was beautifully said. I'll just say that my Dan went into a 40-day retreat here at the center over a year ago, I guess. And you talked about techniques, Jonathan, a question. And so I'd go every day with Dan. I it was back and forth, taking care of business and taking care of, the online stuff. But I'd go and sit for many hours a day. And I was using both some Shinzen Young techniques and also some Salvador Po techniques. And I was kind of integrating both through these 40 days. And it was, I think, right at the end of the 40 days, I went home and I was lying in bed sleeping, and I awoke to the sound of my own voice screaming, "There is no thorn." And I was like, and that was it. It was all that. I was shaking. I think my body shook for about 2 days. It was just energetically such a jarring realization. And I went to Dan and I'm like, I didn't even know what was happening, but, he was there to kind of at least, have this kind of interaction with me and witness what happened. And within 2 days, my mind came back online, and I didn't want to lose it. So then it was like pretending that it was still the case. And Dan kept calling on me. He's like, "You've lost it. You've lost it." I'm like, "No, I haven't. Screw you." And so, that was very humbling, because there became a moment, and it was just such a heavy moment when I'm like, "Oh my God, he's right. I lost it." And just to be humbled and get back on the cushion and get back using those techniques. And even though this understanding had awoken in me, I realized that wasn't enough. Like the ceiling fan still had some momentum, and certainly, it lost a lot of power in that moment, in those 2 days. Like Dan said, I don't feel like I'm as identified or yet as snagged so hard for so long. But I'm forgetting what the question was, but anyway.
Well, you answered it though. I thought you did a great answer.
Okay. You talked about consciousness, and so to me, it's trying to realize. And I think, there's moments to this day and that's the thing. It's not about a state that we reach in meditation. It's not about having a blissful, it's about like literally this moment here as it is, what's arising and passing in every now, which is all there is, the now. And so just taking some time, whether it's even a few minutes in a day, to stop and to remember. To me, like I think Dan said it very nicely, makes me more permeable. So even if I get snagged and identified and reactive, it doesn't go on for weeks and months and years. The balloon can be popped a lot more easily.
Yeah. I think
well, speaking of which, we could perhaps pop that balloon now by having you guide us in a meditation. And
do you want to do
that?
Goes?
Go ahead.
Okay.
And you said about 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can just bring our awareness to whatever's happening in this moment. Just letting this moment be as it is. And for me, meditation is really recognizing what is happening here and now, and being in this moment in a way that is not mediated by my past or myself. So as we observe this moment, and just notice any patterns that may be in play. So notice even the intention of meditating or trying to do something. What am I doing? What do I want? Is there some wanting of this moment to be different than what it is? Or can I be here now? Accepting, being okay with what is. A lot of what pushes us out of this moment is our unconscious mind. So we can just take a moment to really feel what is happening in the mind. Is there a lucidity to this moment? Is there a real presence to this moment? There's nothing I can tell you to do to be here now. We don't want to add more doing to the mind. Can only recognize what the mind is already doing. Just paying attention to whatever is arising in this moment. Inhabiting the inner world, inhabiting the outer world. Noticing how the mind is creating a sense of inner and outer. So we have this phenomena that is changing, and we are aware. This awareness is unchanging. Awareness has no quality. If we hold these two dimensions, the changing and unchanging, really penetrate, not by doing, but by being. Then even these two dimensions, we may realize, are not two. As they say in Zen, not one, not two.
That was wonderful. I can tell you've done that before. That was a very, I used to be in a Zen monastery, and that reminded me of those days. And I really like the clarity of that instruction, bringing us back to sanity in a somewhat insane world.
Yeah, I love Zen. I love the simplicity and the impossibility to make sense of it with the mind.
Yes. Lovely.
And Brian looks blissed out, which is always a good sign.
That's great.
Mhm.
Well, it's been
This
a
has been-
pleasure.
Yeah, a real treat. And, I just really appreciate how you've taken all that you've known and worked together to put out something that inspires people and reminds them of our true home.
Now, you mentioned that Samadhi Part 3, is that a film that's in the works now that hasn't been? Okay.
It is, yes. Yeah. So part 1 was sort of why samadhi is important. Part 2 was what samadhi is. And part 3 is sort of how to realize samadhi. So it's about practice and about sadhana.
So when does my non-samadhi mind get to experience this? Because it wants more.
Yeah, it's a good question. People, we try not to let ourselves get pinned down because we sometimes will create a film and it just won't be right and we have to toss it or scrap it. So we're hoping, probably early next year, but it's not up to us ultimately.
Right. I understand.
It has to feel right. So.
And where can we find it when it comes out and find the other parts 1 and 2 and also Inner Worlds and Outer Worlds?
Sure. So awakentheworld.com is the repository for all these films, and they're translated into about 30 different languages.
Wow.
There's 6 or 7 narrated languages, and the rest are subtitled. Awakentheworld.com, also YouTube. Our YouTube channel is Awaken the World Film, without an S. So it's just Awaken the World Film. Yeah.
And you can watch any of the films for free, always, as well as access. We have some pre-recorded guided meditations. So everything's released for free.
Yes, and there's a like with the Samadhi films, we released it's the Samadhi guided meditation series. It's a 4-part series of meditations. So really, like the practice part of it, we've really put into those guided meditations. This next film will be about all forms of sadhana, so it'll be more broad. But really, if you want a practice that leads to samadhi, that 4-part series is a great place to start.
Well, all of those films and those meditations and you're talking to us today is a real gift for our listeners. I'm so grateful that you could come on and share this with us. It's been really lovely.
It's truly a pleasure, and I just wish we had more time. As always, I'm like, I could just sit here for a few more hours and make another tea. And
I know, and I have pages of notes and other questions that I could have asked, but I really do think though that you went in depth anyway, even with the limited time we have.
Yeah. So we always tell our listeners, and I don't need to tell the two of you because you are real explorers, but feel free to contact us on our website, awarenessexplorers.com, and tell your friends about their movies, and of course, most importantly, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you.
keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.